All right, are we here? All right, well, good morning, everyone, to Unity of Springfield. My name is Dan DeCarlo, and I've been a member of Unity for over 20 years here in Springfield for 5 or 6. But today we're going to be talking about how to be a master gardener of your life. I gave a similar program earlier this week, and it was more on a philosophical standpoint on a master gardener to a bunch of master gardeners here in Greene County. I modified it a little bit for this morning to give it more of a spiritual text, or you might say. But the important thing is that we're here, and I appreciate it very much, and we're going to proceed with the art of living your bliss as you become the master gardener of your life. It is our gardens that define our virtue, connection to nature, and divine presence. Unity of Springfield, Adult Education and World History, Religions class, where we are this morning. This program can be found on my foundation website, thekongdanfoundation.com. We each have a desire to discover the divine presence that defines who we are, and most importantly, who we are meant to become. As vibrations connect us with the flow emanating from the universe, not simply from a religious standpoint, but from the spirit. Radiant, fully awake, we tend our gardens as we tend our life. It is that nothing that is real ever dies. Only name, forms, and illusions, as Eckhart Tolle teaches us. Actually, this is very much a Buddhist concept. That it is through and by our virtue we create aha moments for both ourselves and others to follow as we discover the narrative that defines our highest attributes as if a window to our soul. To be in the garden is the deepest form of self-expression, release, prayer, and meditation. To act as if we are teaching and to start paying attention to ourselves and noticing how we live. Creating a place for deeper understanding of who we are here to become, as well as attentive to the way things are. To become almost Zen-like, where our breathing is used as an exclusive object of attention to develop concentrated focus. Where awareness grounded in our breath is used to see clearly into the impermanent and empty nature of all formations. Letting go into freedom that emerges into insight. To be in the garden is the deepest form of self-expression, release, prayer, and meditation. The garden of our heart-mind, focusing on what takes us there. There are many paths to the same universal destination. Rather, to be following the Christ presence, the Buddhist Bodhisattva vow, i.e., to where your feet are in the moment, or living as Chungsa's perfected man, and Wu Wei, the art of doing nothing, or others. All are directed from the universal seed that is already present, waiting for the light to spring forth, and the divine presence that already exists within each of us. So much is simply learning to pay attention to our endeavors and cause and effect. We are, as Carl Sagan taught us, star stuff. The vibrations we respond to are moving us beyond who we think we are, so that we may become the presence we are intended to be. It's the purpose of meditation, and so prayer, that we may enter the flow of what Sagan and many others call our ultimate destiny. When we think of Claude Monet and his paintings in his gardens, it is his impressionistic approach that pulls us and takes us there. We get to define for ourselves what he was saying because the lines are blurred. An artist defines for himself where the lines will be, if they exist at all. Gardeners have the greatest palettes to work with as we create the structure and colors to display ourselves each season. If given a chance, I think Monet would have laughed between brushstrokes and said, "Yes, I am a master gardener too." Monet hired gardeners from all over the East. He was fairly well-to-do, and as an inspiration for his paintings, he would hire gardeners to come to Giverny, his home in France, and he would use that as an inspiration for his paintings. For me, he certainly was the master gardener. In China, the Persian gate of the Dai Temple at the foot of Taishan Mountain, which is shown here, the crane and celebration of Confucius' birthday at the Confucius Temple. The building to the right is known as the Persian Gate, located in the Dai Temple and garden as you approach Mount Taishan in Shandong province. Every emperor for over 1,000 years went through this garden on his way to ascend the mountain. It is from here Confucius told us virtues are to match the heaven and earth, which is really what should define us. 2 of the 4 symbols of the Chinese constellation, which is basically the stars above we see every night, Azure Dragon and White Tiger, were enshrined here over 2,000 years ago. Confucius told us that the garden symbolizes that we are all one, just as Lao Tzu taught us that we are but one of 10,000 things found in nature. We don't just take a packet of seeds and throw them in the yard and wait to see what happens. We nurture them as they nurture us. Many feel that Lao Tzu was the ultimate sower of seeds who helped to define our way. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, "Sorrow looks back, worry looks around, and faith looks up." As master gardeners, we acknowledge that as with our lives, our gardens and seeds we plant need structure, discipline, and what we call, when following, the cause and effect of nature. As Emerson taught us, that we are to have an institutional memory that aligns with and acknowledges the nature found in all things, and that philosophically considered, the universe is composed of nature and the soul. That is, with this, we are all transformative. And with our efforts and hands-on approach, i.e. in the dirt or soil, we too become universal and transcendental ourselves. A seeming universal flow we attach to that carries us, as well as others, along to the next step that needs to be taken. This is Emerson and a picture of a garden that was designed by Frederick Law Armstrong. Actually, the picture on the bottom right is Central Park in New York City that Olmsted designed, and really what made him famous many years ago. Even to the parks designed by Frederick Law Armstrong that best symbolize this connection. Many feel that Armstrong was the first true master gardener and is recognized as the founder of American landscape architecture and the nation's foremost park maker, as he showed us how landscapes, parks, and gardens could integrate into our lives in a meaningful way. With our gardens, we learn what works and what to do differently. Like life, we look for perfection where perfection does not exist and change. We learn that there are second and third chances to get it right next time. Becoming one with the natural order of things, we intrinsically know that as we tend our garden, it's not just what we do, it exemplifies who we are yet to become. Any comments?
That garden is magnificent. I've spent hours in that garden. I lived in New York for a while. And when he designed that, it was because he felt that people needed that connection with nature and that it needed to be carved out of a new and growing city so that people could have that connection. And it did lead to him doing, It did lead to him doing gardens all over the country because that whole thing of the connection of nature was so part of his consciousness.
He was a great teacher. And it's really amazing how cities all over the country, even here in Springfield, followed a lot of his design techniques and the overreaching aspect of what it means to where we live. Garden design is really, really amazing. I've been to Central Park, I think, once. I was there was a Mickey Mantle's restaurant that was immediately adjacent to the park, and So that's why I went. But anyway, the park is really amazing. But it's really, and I'm glad you said that, because I think for us, there is a real intrinsic value that parks contribute to our livelihood. I often find it interesting in all my travels to China that many of the ancient parks that have been there for over 1,000 years that may symbolize that an idea that might focus on Lhasa or Confucius or someone else, they're called temples. And I think it's because of the reverence that they have for nature. And I think that's really a key thing that Ohm's story taught us, that there is a real reverence that we all have or should have for environment. It's what we do here with our planet Unity. We try to do our part. We try to exemplify the spirit of being one with our environment. I know I'll be having a plant booth again in a couple of months at our Planet Unity activity. But I think the important thing, again, looking back at what Ohm's story did for cities, is over 300 cities across the country that have parks that were ultimately inspired or designed by Olmsted. It's really amazing the impact that this guy had. But as I say here at the end, it's becoming one with the natural order of things. We intrinsically know that as we tend our garden, it's not just what we do, it exemplifies who we are yet to become. What is it we do as master gardeners? What connections and vibrations do we follow? What and or who is our inspiration? For myself, it's this relationship that as a young boy on a farm east of Lamar, about 50 miles from here, that I first gained an appreciation for nature. Wading in the creek, climbing huge oak trees, and helping my grandma in her garden. It's my earliest memories, helping my grandma in her garden. Much later, as a city planner, doing master plans, creating visions for others to follow. In Massachusetts and Rhode Island, where I first became a master gardener 30 years ago. Then as a planner and neighborhood specialist in Florida, doing community gardens with Mount's Botanical Garden and the HOAs, which are homeowners associations, creating those aha moments, capturing the attention of people passing by, and now back home in the Ozarks. That we teach others while learning to finesse wisdom we can pass along, with them saying, yes, I can do that. And I think that's the important aspect that I really want to convey this morning. That many times we have a sense that things are beyond us, or it's something we can't do. And what I always say when I'm getting ready to do a project, or even when I was doing master plans for neighborhoods and communities or one thing or another, I would always say, put it in the context of the next three things. That's all you have to do. What are the next three things I need to do to make this happen? And what that does is it brings things down to the level that we can have a sense of what our next step should be. And really, as master gardeners or as gardeners, that's what we do. what are the next 3 steps I need to take in order to fulfill the vision that I have of what I want to complete or create. But this idea of finessing wisdom that we can pass along to others so that they too can say, I can do that. I have an anecdote. It's not here, but I'd like to say, I went to China for over 20 years, taught at a university there, lived next to the Confucius Mansion, taught there, and I always had people who felt limited as to what they could do because of where they lived. And they would always ask me, how can I do that? What is that? What can I do that exhibits my own sense of self-expression in the environment in which I live? And for 5 or 6 years, 8 years, that really, until I became a teacher at a university where everybody knew me because my name was Kong Dan, and I had done the Daily Word in China that had been seen all over Shandong province. Many people didn't really know who I was, but they knew the name Kong Dan. And when I started teaching their children at the university, wow, that was amazing. It was an amazing experience because basically what I tried to teach, particularly the 400 students that I had, who were all girls, they were all going to be English teachers, or hope to be, and it was that aspiration that they could say, yes, I can do that. Many of them came from villages or out in the countryside. They were the first child in their family ever to go to school. And their plan was to go back to their community and to be a teacher. They wanted to be a teacher. And they wanted to have the aspiration that, yes, I could do that. And as their English teacher, and they were going to be teaching English, I took that pretty seriously. That just myself as to what that meant. But we teach others while learning to finesse wisdom we can pass along. That is what we do. John, did you have?
Yeah, I just kind of had an example of how to be a gardener in your space, in your area. And I heard a radio clip on NPR yesterday that was talking about this guy that was living, owned a mountain in Colorado that was pretty high up. And he had this grove of aspen trees, which is, if you know about aspen trees, they're a community. They're really one being that are all interconnected underground. And because of some of the weather things and climate things, it was having some problems. It was being stressed. And he was wanting to build there, and so what he decided was he was going to go ahead and trim out some of this aspen grove to heal, so that it could heal. And where it wasn't really the best place to build a building site, but he chose to do it there because it would be helpful to the grove, and plus he had needed to take spruce out to keep it from competing with the other trees, and that he used that for building material, and kind of the permaculture mentality of making things work together. And then in my own personal experience on the acreage that I live on, is I just look at what naturally grows, what can I add to it. Looking at the interconnectedness of some of the animals and and natural plants that are going on, and then what can I give to it? How can I help water flow and other kinds of things, but not change the nature of what is there? And that this relationship that we have with nature is a part of, for me anyways, it's been a part of that experience of doing gardening.
Thank you, John. Actually, that's a great definition and a great way of talking about something called Feng Shui. In Eastern thought and philosophy, the environment we create in which we live is an extension of who we are. And how we create that environment is very important. And there are certain principles that we use that take us there. And ultimately, what we are trying to do is to capture the flow and to become a part of it. Becoming a part of what that universal flow means for each of us is a central aspect to becoming who we are here to become. And that is essential. And I think John's definition of what he did with the aspen trees and how he looked at that, I think is really a central core to creating the environment that not only has our own interests of what we think we want to do in mind, but how we best treat and nurture the environment in which we find ourselves. And I think that is a central core to Eastern thought, but to the idea of becoming one. It's the oldest thought in China of Taoism is that, we are but one of 10,000 things. What does that mean? What does that mean? That means we are but one within the universe, within the environment in which we find ourselves, and we are to find our way to augment and support that and complement. One of the keys to, we talk about the I Ching and we talk about yin and yang and one thing and another, but the key to that is finding complementary opposites to our lives. That is where we seem to get lost sometimes. Having understanding of the purpose of complementary opposites and how collectively they bring us to a vision that is best for everyone. That was always a major idea when I used to do master planning for communities, was this idea of bringing together different forces in such a way that they could complement each other. And that is what we seem to struggle with in the world today. Thank you again, John. The secret is not only finding our bliss, as Joseph Campbell taught us, but living it as well. When I was in Florida doing interest designs and plantings for homeowners associations, I would always say to develop a 3 to 5 year plan that fits your budget and what you would like to create will look like. It will change with your ideas and maintenance as you go, often as a mystery to be lived, as one step tells us what the next step will be. Many times our gardens are like that. As your own connection with nature changes you as well. And I think that's the important thing that I'm really trying to convey this morning. We change. The people around us changes. Our environment changes. Nothing is static. or stays the same. And that is as the universe intended. It's not supposed to be the same way all the time. We are not supposed to be the person we were yesterday. We're supposed to be who we are meant to be beyond who we think we are. And I think that's a challenge, but that's why we're here. But it is our gardens, for me, are like an implement that helps to take us there as our connection changes. There's a saying here that by Joseph Campbell, that's the privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. I often think most people go through their whole lives and don't have a clue who they are, which is sad. Knowing that all forms of art are an outward expression of what is called Qi, the cosmic breath or flow of energy with which all creation must be in accord, whether it be painting, poetry, music, or the creation of a garden. Our gardens are also means of self-expression to something larger than ourselves, showing compassion for all living things. What I call the work of refraining from acting, speaking, or thinking in such a way as to cause harm, where we discover the virtue taught by Confucius as a reference and a love of nature. That's why I love teaching in Chufu, the birthplace of Confucius. I feel like I've lived many lives there. 18 years ago, in 2004, I had my first book published in China about the I Ching, the symbiotic nature of the dragon and Taoism. Included at the publisher's request was the following: my interpretation of a segment of the I Ching that I had written 10 years earlier. And I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I'm just going to talk about the last couple of paragraphs, but what it meant to me at the time to be a master gardener. Well, maybe I will read it, because I think we have time. I wrote this when I was living in Fall River, Massachusetts, and we had already had 10 major snowstorms. I had to shovel my driveway every time, and I lived on the same street as a city councilman down the street, so they always kind of plowed my street, and I couldn't get out. But anyway, it was just confined, under the weather, snow for over like 6 weeks to 2 months, constantly. I had just completed a master gardening course in Massachusetts, and was doing one at the University of Rhode Island, which was only about maybe 30 miles from where I lived, which is actually closer than Boston. But it basically was to the extent of confined and under the weather, weariness sets in. Kind of like the way we feel with this virus. The dead of winter, everything is covered. Snow several feet deep. Hibernation, waiting, with listless passion, with all things waiting for spring. As the spirit is in its deepest despair, yang ebbs into nothingness, and yin springs forward. The ice melts, and the crocus begin to bloom, as the mother robin appears, harbinger of spring. Casting away the cobwebs, shunning aside shackles of mind and body. It's time to find our gardens again. Blinded by the sun in your mind's eye, you begin by sorting through implements reluctantly put away last autumn, sorting through seeds and preparing small plants. The task begins again in earnest. Arise early, refreshed, finding yourself in the garden, soon to be basking in the midday sun. Do not delay, showing only diligence and respect for nature. Plant wisdom and know the freedom to choose. Plant clarity, and soon understanding comes to the surface. Plant harmony and be at peace with the fruits of your labor. Startled from sleep, still listless, you are dreaming. A look at the window confirms. The snow is several feet deep, but your passion is beginning to return. And as gardeners, if you do this every year like I do, then I think you'll understand the sentiment behind that. But I seem to have a problem here with my, doesn't seem to fit. All right, let's try this. Well, I'm not done. What happens if I do this? All right. Oh, I have too much on the slide, I can see. All right. I'll just do what I can read here. I was unable to print this out because my printer broke. I'm sorry. I was going to print a copy for everyone, but it's on my website. It is our virtue that is on display, and how we envision our role in the universe with nature as our teacher. That's what we do. That's who we are. We often lose sight of the meaning of virtue because we get so caught up in the thought of values. Values this, values that. It's all these No, it's not values for me. It's virtue. Virtue begins first, and then your values are based on that virtue. Yes, John?
Yeah, Dan, could you clarify how you're using the word virtue? Because that's not as used by Western thinkers as much as it is in the East and in Confucius and
absolutely.
Such.
Thank you. And actually, when I first started writing 30 years ago and started having books published in China, one thing or another, I think one of the reasons why they let me teach and live in Qufu as long as they did, and Qufu was the birthplace of Confucius, was I had an understanding of what that meant. What is a virtue? And virtue is something we are each born with. We have that. It's who we are. And it's that connection to nature. It's that connection to the intrinsic value and capturing the flow. And that is really the key for me, is understanding what that flow means. And virtue is becoming a part of that flow. Whether it's connecting, as I do, to the thoughts of Joseph Campbell and Bliss, or Monet, who I spoke of earlier, with his artistic ideas, or even some, as crazy as it may sound, some music, even some of the Beatles stuff. It's capturing the sense of who we are, and the reason why Confucius has lived for over 2,500 years in the hearts and minds of the people of China and many in Eastern culture, is that sense of, from the very beginning, before you learn anything, In school, you learn who Confucius was. In grade school, the first thing they do in teaching Chinese language is they do it by learning the words of Confucius and what that means. What does it mean to have virtue? What does it mean to have a sense of oneness? What does it mean for, as Taoism teaches, to be one with 10,000 things? What does that mean? That doesn't mean we go down and cut down a forest without thought of what that would cause. We are one with it. When you study Tolstoy, who I've spoken about here, or you study Emerson, who we've talked about here, and we talk about others who are a part of a universal flow, even going back to ancient Greece, and think of Plato and other learned folks over the centuries. It is the sense of virtue that they taught us. And in a nutshell, it's really very simple. It's the ability to see beyond yourself. For me, it's being beyond the beyond. To be beyond I used to tell my students that most people don't have a clue as to who they are until they're 30.